This is CBC Vancouver News.
The only way to describe it is to call it a mini lake or a lagoon.
Frozen or bursting. BC's cold snap is wreaking havoc on pipes and plumbing in a nonprofit and a hospital. Plus,
I don't like it, but people need to live somewhere.
I think Canada in itself is short of housing, and BC particularly, and Oak Bay should do its part.
as the province orders more cities and towns to build more housing, one Vancouver Island community says it doesn't know how it will make its quota. And
we need to have a reset at the ministry.
The Premier brings in a new Minister for Children and Family Development after calls for her to resign. Good evening, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. BC's cold snap has been playing havoc on some pipes and plumbing across Metro Vancouver. Many homes and businesses are reporting frozen or burst pipes. Joel Ballard visited a local nonprofit forced to close because they were flooded.
Early Saturday morning, disaster struck at the Down Syndrome Resource Foundation in Burnaby.
The only way to describe it is to call it a mini lake or a lagoon.
A pipe in the heating system froze and burst, spilling water into the walls and flooding the second floor.
It means for at least this week, all of our programs and services have to be done virtually.
Leslie says the center has closed indefinitely, with reopening estimates anywhere between a few weeks and 6 months.
That is a very serious problem, because then you're talking about delays in development that could have a much more long-lasting impact in a negative way.
And much of the group programming, like Taekwondo, has also been cancelled. Those who attend the center and those who work there worried about missing out on opportunities for socializing.
As I miss all friends and staff there.
Both Jason and his mother worry the isolation could lead to loneliness. Right across the Lower Mainland, the cold snap created challenges. It was a busy weekend for the Vancouver Fire Department, too. Since Friday, it responded to 915 calls. The cold to blame for much of that.
Our crews across the city are responding to the cold weather, specifically around any type of pipes, water sources, sprinkler systems, domestic water supply, for numerous false alarms for fire alarms that bring set off by this.
And in Mission, the emergency department at the local hospital remains closed after a burst pipe led to severe flooding Saturday night.
It was just a cascading wall of water coming down from the wall and ceiling.
Patients had to be diverted to nearby hospitals. Theron says staff are still assessing the damage, and the department, which normally sees up to 100 patients a day, will likely be closed for weeks.
We expect there will be some impact to the surrounding hospitals. We're keeping close tabs on what's happening as patients obviously have to seek care in other locations right now to try and minimize impact to already very congested healthcare system.
They've now had to...
Back at the center, Leslie says the foundation is covered through insurance, but it could face a deductible of up to $25,000.
For instance, $25,000 that we would otherwise put into programs and services that we now have to redirect.
A hefty price tag for the not-for-profit. Joel Ballard, CBC News, Burnaby.
The provincial government will soon release 5-year targets for a second list of cities and towns it considers to be critically short of housing. The first 10 municipalities mandated to build more homes were announced in September. As Belpuria reports, 4 months into the whole process, some still have no idea how they'll complete their order.
Extensive coastline, long history, a proud sense of belonging. Oak Bay is among BC's most desirable communities.
Very walkable, very recyclable, a very attractive place for people to live.
If there were places for them to live. 96% of Oak Bay's tax base is residential. Most of its land is zoned single family.
If you want to build a multifamily where there isn't, you have to go around and buy, say, 4 individual single-family lots just to put up a relatively small apartment building. Those lots in Oak Bay are expensive.
Multifamily building is rare in Oak Bay.
The approvals process can be very, very drawn out. You can imagine how that adds to the final cost and simply drives up housing prices while failing to adequately expand supply.
A new 3-story mixed-use complex will add 6 rental units to the market. It's been 7 years since these 43 high-end condos got the go-ahead, and just this fall, a 15-unit building was approved after it was first proposed 10 years ago.
Some factors that could be involved with the developer side is just the faster processing of the applications. I know my colleagues who have tried have basically turned away. It's a difficult path, or has been in the past. So if you're faced with a 10-year process versus a 3-year process, you are going to go to another municipality.
That could be about to change.
Oak Bay was recently put on the provincial government's list of communities in desperate need of more housing. As a result, it's been mandated to build 664 units over the next 5 years.
The pushback was swift.
This is a significant rollback of democratic principles and powers, and I think it guts the ability of councils to shape the individual communities and to respond to local issues and to be accountable for those changes.
Before the NDP government stepped in, Oak Bay had planned to increase its housing by 640 units over 10 years. It was looking at an infill model of, for the most part, laneway homes and duplexes.
We shouldn't be doing things like building over people's backyards and destroying gardens that are habitats for birds and, that sort of thing.
Well, I don't like it, but people need to live somewhere.
I think Canada in itself is short of housing, in BC particularly, and Oak Bay should do its part.
To that end, Oak Bay says it's trying to get barriers out of the way.
I think it's going to be very difficult to make the target.
The NDP government has a plan for that too.
And as a province, we'll step in to be able to make the decisions that are necessary to do so.
While Oak Bay navigates BC's stormy housing crisis, the next wave of communities to be hit with mandated housing targets is expected within the month. Belle Puri, CBC News, Oak Bay.
Premier David Eby has shuffled his cabinet, removing Mitzi Dean as Minister of Children and Family Development. Some First Nations leaders have been calling for Dean to resign after details of a foster child abuse case came to light last year. Eby claims his decision had nothing to do with that.
We need to have a reset at the ministry. And I'm very grateful to Mitzi for taking on the important work of childcare. This is an area that is so important to so many families across the province, that they have access to high-quality, affordable childcare.
Grace Lohr will take over in Children and Family Development. Mitzi Dean is now Minister of State for Childcare. Andrew Mercier, meanwhile, has been named Minister of State for Sustainable Forestry to support the Forests Minister. And MLA George Chow will take over as Parliamentary Secretary for International Credentials. When couples split up, it can often lead to tough conversations and even legal battles over who gets a pet. Changes to family law around animal ownership and possession came into effect today. One legal expert says the change is important because the animal will no longer be considered just a possession. She tells CBC Radio's On the Coast the law is timely as experts see a rise in people who adopted pets during COVID and are now splitting.
Calls to my office went up precipitously for pet custody because people are like, well, I want to keep my pet. I could care less about the spouse. I'm done with the spouse, but I need to keep my pet.
Factors the court will consider include the individual's ability to care for the animal, relationships between children and pets, and any history of family violence. The new law will apply to all household pets, although experts say in most cases that will be cats and dogs. Still with animals, a wildlife protection agency in northern BC is having a record year for rescued bear cubs. Northern Lights Wildlife Society in Smithers is now caring for more than 110 cubs. Last year at this time, it had 70. The agency says wildfires and extreme droughts are two factors that threaten bears' food sources, and that forces some of them into towns where they risk becoming a pest or worse.
Either they come into contact with humans, and lots of humans are not very sympathetic to their plight and just want them gone. And so a lot of bears have been shot as a result.
The Society wants municipalities to be more proactive about limiting interactions people have with bears. They recommend you get bear-proof bins for garbage, recycling, and compost, and ask people to pick fruit trees so ripening food is not within paw's reach. A police tactic used to collect DNA that ultimately led to the arrest of Ibrahim Ali in a high-profile murder case in Burnaby is being criticized. Ali, who came to Canada as a refugee from Syria, has been convicted of first-degree murder. As Michelle Gassoub explains, civil liberty advocates say the tactic sets a dangerous precedent.
We're learning more today about a sting operation during which police secretly collected the DNA of around 150 members of BC's Kurdish community as they tried to identify and find the suspect in a high-profile murder case involving a teenage girl in Burnaby. Today, the Canadian press reporting that police posed as a marketing team at a New Year's Eve event for the Kurdish community. They were giving out small cups of tea that were numbered. When those teacups were returned, the police officers collected them, they swabbed them, they gathered that DNA. Canadian press also reporting that $5 Tim Hortons gift cards were given out to people at the event so that they would provide their personal information, their names, their contact information. And it was eventually someone who drank the tea, whose DNA was provided through that cup, happened to be the cousin of Ibrahim Ali, who was eventually arrested and convicted in this case. And it was that DNA that led them straight to Ali. The BC Civil Liberties Association coming out very strongly against this tactic, saying they were stunned that this sets a very dangerous precedent and that informed consent was not provided by the people whose DNA was collected.
So in this case, when we see and learn about how our law enforcement agencies might have colored outside the lines and gone outside those very laws that they have been hired to enforce and protect on our behalf, it's really egregious and disappointing and disturbing.
Premier David Eby also commenting on this today, coming out in strong support of police tactics, saying this was a horrific crime and the perpetrator was brought to justice.
To be going back to say to the police who made our community safe again from this particular predator that they should not have done what they did, I really struggle with that analysis.
Ali was convicted in December of the first-degree murder of the teenage girl, whose name is protected under a publication ban. He did appear via video in court today to set a date for sentencing. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Vancouver.
Surrey-based news publisher Black Press Limited has filed for creditor protection and is now entering a sales agreement. Black Press publishes 150 daily and weekly newspapers, magazines, and websites in BC, including the Abbotsford News and Surrey Now Leader. Today, its founder, David Black, announced he's retiring. Black Press has secured a tentative sale with the company with 3 investors. Its subsidiary, Black Press Media, plans to keep operating its local news publications within Canada. Warming shelters across our province are opening their doors for vulnerable people as many struggle to keep warm. This weekend, Surab Sandhu got a look at the work happening behind the scenes at a shelter in White Rock.
It's 10 to 7 on Sunday morning. Upkar Tatley is ready to roll the wheels of his shuttle to pick up those in need of shelter this chilly morning.
Minus 10 plus wind chill. And so it's a little bit colder because the ocean's so close.
A group of people are waiting anxiously for Tatley. They hurry into the minibus to get some respite from the bone-chilling cold.
So if you're outside, you're going to feel it in your face a little bit more. So breathing that in, the cold air, a little bit of frozen moisture, it's going to hit you pretty hard.
Tatley heads the Engaged Communities Canada Society, which runs a daytime warming shelter in partnership with City of White Rock, a service that many are thankful for in this extreme cold weather. After a short ride, passengers hurry into the warming shelter to be greeted with some croissants and a warm cup of coffee.
A lot of them like things like extra sweet. I think maybe because it's just so cold out there, like the sugar just helps warm you up.
The shelter also provides clothing, blankets, and medical aid. Meanwhile, Tatley is headed back to the pickup spot, where more people are waiting for a lift.
We'll send the shuttle out just to find if there are people elsewhere that we perhaps didn't see. People are still sleeping in really difficult situations, so we're always trying to find out where they are.
I would have been very, severely taxed to my limits just to try and survive, much less try and stay warm.
And among the visitors are some with extra needs. But Tatley and his team try their best to leave no one behind.
We see all sorts of people who come through our site. We see seniors, we see people discharged from hospital, we see people who are so quote-unquote rent-evicted. We also see a lot of folks who actually have really good jobs, but they just don't compare to the astronomical rents, costs of living, food.
The dark of night disappears as daylight breaks over the sky. However, the shuttle keeps moving, looking for others in need of a warm shelter and meal. Sohrab Sandhu, CBC News, White Rock.
As more kids turn to Sephora for trendy skincare products and makeup, dermatologists are getting concerned why some products are intentionally marketed to adults only. That's next. And hello to everyone watching our commercial-free live stream. Thanks for being here. The deep freeze in BC is not budging yet, and with that comes a warning about protecting pets. Well, some breeds thrive in this kind of weather, others need help coping with the cold. Janella Hamilton has more.
For some dogs like Bono, frolicking in the snow and cold is what they do best.
Australian Shepherds are generally double-coated, so they're pretty good when it comes to the cold.
She's a hardy little dog, and she just doesn't seem to need anything as long as she can play and run and chase her ball. Yeah, she's good.
But for short-haired breeds or older dogs like Winnie, a jacket or booties are vital.
I like to keep her in a fleece, otherwise after 20 minutes, half hour, she'll start to shiver. And she wears her boots to keep the snow out of her toe beams, Winnie.
Keeping pets warm and dry can be challenging for BC's unhoused population. The Union Gospel Mission says pet-friendly shelters and warming centers on the downtown east side are far and few between, leaving many to stay outdoors with their animals instead. So, how do you tell if your pet is comfortable in the cold? Experts say paying attention to their body language is key.
Dogs don't shiver normally, so it's a good indicator that they're cold. But the other one is if they seem to be sore in their feet. We've got two problems. One, the cold ground, but also we have ice and people spread salt, which will get into the paws and cause irritation.
He says that irritation may cause pets to nibble at their paws. Ingesting road salt or other chemicals used during the winter, such as antifreeze, can cause stomach issues and could even be fatal.
When you bring them home, clean their paws, and especially in between their toes and their underbelly. Frostbite may show up a couple of days later, and that could show up in discoloration of the skin, and it really affects the ears, the tips of the ears, the paws, and the tail.
And it's not just dogs who need extra protection from the winter elements. During extreme cold weather, cats will often seek warm places like under the hood of a parked car.
If you have feral cats in the neighborhood, put out a cardboard box, fill it with straw, not blankets if you can avoid it.
We're their voice and we need to protect them.
Janella Hamilton, CBC News, Vancouver.
If you or someone you know shops at Sephora, you may have noticed some of their customers skewing a bit younger. Some adults are using TikTok to complain about the demographic they've dubbed Sephora Kids. Children as young as 9 who take the store by storm, demanding products from brands like Glow Recipe and Drunk Elephant.
Hi girls, welcome to Sephora.
Lady, you got Drunk Elephant or not?
Oh, it's over there.
Oh my gosh, Izzy, I see it. Excuse me, which retinol product do you recommend?
Aren't you like 9?
FYI, I'm actually turning 10 tomorrow, so basically... Where's your mother?
Consume more and more online content, including ads that are being influenced to buy products not made for them. We've called in an expert to tell us more about how young is too young for certain skincare products. Dr. Ashley Valley joins us now, a family doctor with a focus on dermatology at Rejuvenation Clinic. Thanks very much for coming in.
Of course.
First of all, what is good for adults, for example, at Sephora, and not good for kids? What do we need to watch out for?
So in general, kids have slightly thinner skin and slightly more sensitive skin, more permeable skin barrier that allows the water to leave the skin more easily. They're more prone to irritation and dryness. And so I would tell kids to stick to options that are specifically marketed for sensitive skin or hypoallergenic skin. Things like retinols, AHAs, BHAs, glycolic acid peels, those are all very harsh and can be very drying and irritating for pediatric skin.
What are you hearing from people that come into your clinic? And I understand you do have you do treat some kids.
Yes, I do. Yeah, so in general, I find that kids are often prone to eczema when they're younger. Their skin tends to be very dry, and we require some boosting of the hydration to the skin. And then as we get a little older, there are a lot of changes with hormones and things, and so people can tend towards some acne-prone skin. That's where we start to introduce some medicated skincare products. But again, I would stay away from the over-the-counter options because they're mostly aimed at anti-aging, which isn't always appropriate for that adolescent type skin.
And shifting to adults who perhaps would be looking for those for the anti-aging creams. What about parents and guardians helping their kids separate what is healthy and what is not? What role should they play?
So I have noticed Sephora started marketing some of their products as being safe for children, which I think is a good place to start. I definitely think staying away from active ingredients, peptides, glycolic acid, retinols as a baseline, and sticking to things that are hypoallergenic, non-comedogenic, which means it's not going to block the pores and cause acne, is always a good starting point. I tend to like products that are marketed as hypoallergenic, like CeraVe, Cetaphil. I brought a few of my favorites in.
Sure. Why don't you just show us what would these do for whom?
Honestly, I would recommend for a kid that we would just start with a very gentle cleanser. I have this one by Cetaphil, which I really like, and CeraVe. Those two are really good. And then just a really good sunscreen, either a mineral sunscreen or a chemical sunscreen would be fine, depending on the concern. And then just ending with a moisturizer would be enough for any kid.
There we are. Dr. Ashley Valley, we appreciate your time and your expertise. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you so much.
There is a live shot of downtown Vancouver. Get set for snow. Darius will have your BC-wide forecast after this.
This is the Heidelberg cement plant in Edmonton. Heidelberg is one of the largest producers in the world, but what makes it unique is their mission to create carbon-free cement.
Carbon capture of this scale in a cement plant, this is a very new technology application, and it is a lot of learning.
So why is a cement plant investing in carbon capture? The Edmonton Heidelberg plant produces nearly 900,000 tons of carbon dioxide every year. That's roughly equivalent to the total emissions created by 200,000 cars. Most of Heidelberg's carbon dioxide comes from creating cement, a key ingredient in the formation of concrete.
Cement is the glue that holds everything together in the concrete. It's like the flour in bread. Without it, you just have a bunch of mud and some aggregates.
The only way to create cement is by burning limestone at increasingly high temperatures here in this kiln.
When we heat this material up, not only do we release the emissions from the combustion of the natural gas or the alternative fuels as CO2, we also release the CO2 that's built up in the limestone.
And that's where the carbon capture process comes in. Here's how it works. Instead of going up the stack, carbon dioxide created by the limestone process will be diverted through a series of stages, including heat and cooling, absorbers and desorbers, to separate carbon dioxide from particulate matter and sulfur dioxide. In all, the system will capture 95% of carbon dioxide produced at the facility and compress it for storage.
We're going to send it into a pipeline at supercritical pressure all the way to the Wabamun hub, where it's going to be sequestered underground.
Before all that happens, though, Heidelberg is using this machine to track plant emissions. The The data will be used to fine-tune the plans for the carbon capture system to come.
Because the capture CO2 from cement plant flue gas is never been done in commercial scale, mainly the objective is to prove the chemistry of the chemical that we'll use to capture the CO2.
Industry insiders say this green approach has to be the future of industrial production.
It's one piece of a whole big suite to address greenhouse gas emissions across, yes, heavy industry, but also economy-wide and across the world. But there's no silver bullet for reducing emissions in any industry or in any sector or across the economy.
I have kids. I want to see a brighter, greener future for them. And this presented that opportunity to do a project at scale and help get the industry out there and help build this Alberta homegrown approach. It's exciting.
Heidelberg plans to have the full system up and running by 2026. Stephanie Cramp, CBC News, Edmonton.
We're sharing really important information with the public, and I feel like this is exactly what our job is, especially as the public broadcaster, especially in morning radio. That's incredibly important.
The weather update is brought to you by Direct Buy Furnace. To cool and clean the air in your home, call Direct Buy Furnace. Installing Trane, the most reliable heating and cooling brand.
Time for our BC-wide weather forecast with science and climate specialist Darius Mahdavi, who's going to brace us for what is next.
A lot of different stuff. A lot of bit of a mixed bag. Yeah. So today, just to give you an idea of how strange the weather's been, it was warmer today in Iqaluit than it was here in Vancouver. You can see that here, well below average here on the coast and well above average up in parts of northern Canada. So expect that this sort of strange weather is going to continue. We have these strong outflow winds coming. Temperatures still very low in southern BC and across western Canada. And as we see these outflow winds come in and a Pacific low move in, it's going to collide for a pretty messy time. So as we see temperatures start to rise a little bit over the next few days, but not quite quickly enough to avoid the snow here on the lower mainland. So you can see on the coast, temperatures do start to come up closer and closer to seasonal by the end of the week. In the southern interior as well, we're getting a little bit closer to seasonal, but a little bit slower to move in parts of the interior than here on the coast. Now, in terms of the next system rolling in, we have these snowfall warnings throughout northern BC because we have a lot more snow rolling down, and then this other system is going to roll up late in the week. So lots of activity still to come. Temperatures now transitioning into more of a storm, storm being the main concern instead of temperatures. But you can see late tomorrow, we have this system start to roll in, hits the island first, South Island, and then rolls up the west coast of the island, affects the east coast as well, and then it hits here in Vancouver. Starts out more than likely as some snow overnight, but then it depends really on the how warm temperature, how long it takes for temperatures to come up to determine what exactly we're going to see. Could be snow, rain, freezing rain, sleet, mix of all the above more than likely. It's not going to be a very nice time, and especially in parts of the more inner parts, inland parts, in the valley in particular, into higher elevations, could be a pretty nasty one. If we look at our accumulation map, you can see it really rolls down. The system rolls down, affecting northern Canada first, or northern BC first, and then as we zoom in here on the coast, south coast, here we go. Plenty of snow coming across the board, and here in the south coast, particularly in the valley into higher elevations, we're going to see potentially quite the snowfall as that Arctic air, those outflow winds meet that Pacific low. Now, across BC, plenty of snow coming tomorrow, particularly in central BC, before it comes down here to the south. And then lastly, you can see here in our 5-day forecast, plenty of activity. Overnight snow starts tomorrow into Wednesday, and then just rain to get us through the end of the week, Dan.
We have all been warned. Darius, thanks very much.
Thanks, Dan.
And that is your late news for Monday. Thank you for joining us tonight. For news at any hour, check our website, cbc.ca/BC. Your next local news is on the early edition on CBC Radio 1. That begins tomorrow morning at 5:30. Have a good night.